All right, so we are in the book of Esther. We're at the end of Esther chapter 5 if you want to follow along, or in fact some of you will be reading along, so go ahead and join me there. We started looking at Esther chapter 5, starting in verse 9 to the end of the chapter last week. So I want to go back there and finish up what we were doing, and then we'll go on into chapter 6. Let's see if we can sort of recollect rather than necessarily having to read. So we know that that Mordecai, so we know that Esther has gone before the king. She has petitioned him, but the petition she gave him was to come to dinner, a banquet with himself, and to bring Haman along. And then we see starting in verse 9 that Haman is pleased and excited because he's got the invitation, but on his way home he sees Mordecai, which makes him angry and upset. And how does he choose to deal with his frustration?
He talks to his wife.
Okay, and who else? Who else besides his wife? Just
all of his friends.
Yeah, a couple of friends.
Okay, so he gathers them all together, and what kind of a conversation does he have exactly?
He says, what do I do? This guy doesn't like me, and I don't like him.
Well, you're jumping ahead a little bit. He does something else first.
Look at all I've got.
Okay.
Look at all I've done. Look how much the king likes me. Look how much the queen likes me.
Okay, he launches into, as I recounted it last week, a slideshow of all of his accomplishments and friends and all of the important things that have happened to him. Now, it's kind of interesting because think about, so his view on it is, look at all these things I've got, and yet, what? I'm not happy because of this one guy who won't bow down to me. Now, contrast that with the attitude that God's people are supposed to have. Look at all I've got, and... Okay, exactly. So even if we can't say, look at all I've got, the response is supposed to be...
Well, I'm going to answer your question.
Oh,
rather than look at all I've got, we really should say, look at all that God has blessed me.
Yes, yes.
He's loaned it to us.
Yes.
Basically.
And that was kind of the phrase that I was thinking of, was look at all I've got that God has given me. You know, it's a very different mindset. And to the point of how we react, then we're supposed to react in a thankful manner, whereas Haman is angry and frustrated because the one thing that he wants he's not getting, or the one other thing, I guess, maybe, who knows. So what we see that's kind of interesting in Haman's mindset is he uses this opportunity to tell his family all these good things he has and has been given, and to remind himself and to remind them of them. But his conclusion at the end of this recitation is not, wow, I've been so blessed, or wow, I should be thankful. It's rather, this one thing is keeping me from being happy about all of this. And so it's like that. It's almost like he everything about Mordecai, that he blames him for not being able to be happy with all the things he has. It's Mordecai's fault that he doesn't enjoy all the things that he has. Now, as we said, the Christian mindset is supposed to be, look at what God has blessed me with, and boy, am I thankful. But how often do we get into this same kind of mindset of, look at all these, I've got so much, and yet this is missing. And without this, I'm not happy, I'm not complete.
That wasn't exactly what I said. I said we are supposed to be thankful in all circumstances.
In all circumstances, that's true.
And that's whether it is good or bad. We're supposed to find something to be thankful for in everything.
That's true. And so really right now what I'm talking about is the better of those two alternatives, in the sense of the work from a materialism standpoint. When we are having good things, how often do we say, or do we know people who've said, but I still need this. I still... I'm not happy because I'm missing this.
I sure would like to have that new Corvette.
Right. Me too. But
that is a good-looking car.
Okay, so and that's the thing is as long as we have our value still somewhat stuck in this world, there's always going to be stuff that we want that's more than what we've got. As long as our value is in those terms, there's always going to be... Now, it's interesting. Dave Ramsey talks about... I assume most all of you know who Dave Ramsey is at this point. So Dave Ramsey talks about the mindset of wealthy and wealth and poverty But one of the points that he makes is, okay, so there's different mindsets about people who tend to stay poor and people who tend to become and stay wealthy. And there's aspects about how they make choices and different things like that. But he said one thing that's pretty universal is whatever kind of person you were when you were poor, you're still going to be that kind of person at the heart of it when you're wealthy. And that means that if you were a person who was happy and joyful and the people and love the people around you when you're poor, you're going to be like that when you're wealthy. But if you're miserable when you're poor, not only miserable because you're poor, but if you're a miserable kind of person when you're poor, you're still going to be a miserable kind of person when you're wealthy. It isn't going to change your fundamental character. Ian.
Kind of goes along with the idea of Matthew 6, verse 20 and 21. It says, "But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be."
Okay. And we could actually, I think it's interesting because you can reverse that too and say where your heart is, that's where you're going to store up your treasure. It works in both directions. And that mindset of I've got to have one more thing is very much rooted in this world.
Another attitude, like what Ramsey says, you'll be the same no matter what. If you're generous and willing to share when you're poor, you'll do the same when you're rich. Some people say, well, I can't share because I'm poor.
Right.
Well, if you can't share when you're poor, guess what? You're not going to share when you're rich.
That's exactly right. Yeah, all of those things kind of run in there together. And to the extent that you do share while you're rich, you will do it because you feel like you have an absolute obligation and there's no way you can get around it kind of a thing, You will find reasons not to. And so when we look at this kind of mindset, and we look at Haman's mindset, we've already seen how worldly and ungodly he is, but this is sort of a reiteration of that fundamental flaw. And I think an important thing for us to recognize in ourselves as a potential weakness when we think about how to strengthen our Christian lives. Because I think, when you talk about most Christians are not going to say, out loud anyway, I'm not happy because I don't have that new Corvette. Now, Jerry said it in jest, although I appreciate that you enjoy the look of it, and I do too. But neither one of us are, I hope at least, are sitting home at night going, man, I can't be happy until I get that new Corvette.
Want and need is two different
Okay, and so for me especially, I'm not going to be happy because I'm never going to get that new Corvette. So, but you're right, want and need are two different things, but even when we can recognize those two things, want can get in the way of us being happy if we're too focused on it. But so you don't usually hear Christians too often speak in the sense of, I want it or else I'm not going to be happy when we're talking about something material. Not usually. Now, there may be that thought behind it, and certainly you hear Christians say, I would really like to have one of those. And I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that, but we know that it's probably wrong to say, I want it, I'm not going to be happy. When we talk about physical things like a car or a house or something like that. But what you do see a lot more often with Christians is that they want to have the right relationship. They're trying to define, I want a husband, I want a wife, I want that, I want a child, I want these kind of things. And they get their life focused around specific things that are still part of this world, not part of the spiritual world. Now, I'm not saying that family and relationships cannot be part of your spiritual life, but when you aren't happy, when you are constantly seeking because you are missing something that is a physical thing, that's the same kind of thinking we're seeing here. We don't like to think about it in those terms, but it's true. And so we have to be very careful not just to define it in terms of some kind of a physical, object, which is easy to say, okay, that's materialism, but to recognize that materialism is being focused on the things of this life. And that's a much broader context than just the cars and the houses and the jewelry and stuff like that. And so I think that mindset of, because what Haman wants here isn't really something material in the sense that he doesn't want something that Mordecai possesses, I guess, other than his life in that sense. But he's frustrated because of the existence of this physical experience that he's having. And so it's dangerous for us to start thinking in terms of, my life would be complete if I had this relationship, if I had this person, if I had this experience, whatever it is. And that's the problem with Haman's thinking here. So I think we need to be a little bit broader in our understanding of what materialism is to recognize the danger involved in it. So Haman is unable to be happy, and then we get to what Jerry had said, which is that the solution that his family gives him is go create a gallows 50 cubits high in order to hang him on it. As somebody said, I think it was Mike who said, that's not an execution, that's a demonstration or something. I mean, I misphrased.
Exhibition.
It's an exhibition. It's not an execution, it's an exhibition. This is again, it's not about killing him as much as it is about doing something that so publicly shows who Haman is, and that he can do anything he wants to, and that he can, and that he's publicly showing the world what happens if you don't bow down to him. So it's not simply let's get rid of the guy who's bugging me. It's let's turn this into a spectacle, and that's the mindset. So then I love his wife say, and his friend said to him, have a gallows 50 cubits high made, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go joyfully with the king to the banquet. And you think like this is very perverse thinking, All right, I got him killed now. Let's go have a good old time at the banquet. It's just
hungry.
It's just exactly. I'm hungry. That's what reminds me of a scene in Jurassic Park where they're talking about they're watching these velociraptors just devour this animal, and it's this awful thing. And when they get done with it, they're talking about what happened. And then the owner of the park says, "Okay, time for lunch. Who's hungry?" And the rest of them are like, not us, So it's just a weird kind of way to think. But that makes him happy. So he's off to go and get Mordecai hanged. And here again, I've talked about this a number of times, but this book, this story is so well written in terms of setting up the sequence of these events because of what happens next. So somebody read for me chapter 6, verses 1 through 1 through 8.
On that night the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold and who had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, "What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this?" The king's young men who attended him said, "Nothing has been done for him." And the king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace to speak to the king about having Mordecai hanged on the gallows that he had prepared for him. And the king's young men told him, "Haman is there, standing in the court." And the king said, "Let him come in." So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?"
Okay, stop there. I told you to go too far. Let's stop there for a second because this sort of sets us up. And you kind of giggled a little bit as you're reading this. It's really hard to read this out loud and not giggle a little bit because you know where this is going.
This is a Shakespearean comedy.
It really is. And that's the thing it really is. It is worthy of a Shakespearean kind of a thing. And the thing there's a phrase in writing called Chekhov's gun. Anybody ever heard of Chekhov's gun? Okay, Ian has. So you want to tell us what it is, or?
Well, if in the first scene a gun is mentioned, then it has to kill someone in the second scene.
Okay, it's the idea that if you mention something significant, that it should foreshadow something later. And so in this situation, this whole story is like this, where there's these series of foreshadowings. But almost every single thing that they mention that's a significant point will later on become significant in the story. And this one doesn't take any time at all before you get the payoff of it. But nevertheless, there's this foreshadowing here of, and this setting up of the whole situation where here he comes, and he's coming there to talk about hanging the guy, and we know the king's mind is going in a very different direction at this point. And so here again, one of the great aspects of storytelling is you typically know more than the characters do. Up to a point. You don't know everything, but you know more than the characters do. And so we've got this perfectly set up here. So why is the king... Well, first of all, why do you think that the king is having trouble sleeping?
I think we see throughout this whole event that's happening, we see God's hand in it.
Okay. Yeah. This is not an accidental thing. He didn't just get sleeplessness one particular night, and it happened to be the night that Haman was going to show up to ask Mordecai be hanged. This is God doing something to the king to keep him awake, and then leading him directly into recognizing or a train of thought that will lead him to want to honor Mordecai. This is an obvious kind of a thing that this is what it's setting up. So we have that this is what's being set up. And so
apparently they didn't have Benadryl back then, so they brought out the official records to be read.
Benadryl, melatonin, whatever it was. I mean, certainly if you're having a hard time sleeping, that would probably be the way to go. You know, like it's like reading the book of Joshua. You know, pick the wrong parts of Joshua, and you can be asleep in like 5 minutes because it's like reading a property deed. You know, a line of this goes to there, and then it went over to here, and then it went down to there. You know, really boring. So he has them pull out the Chronicles, and they're reading it. So, and here again, you got to think that's a fairly big book, and so they happen to open up, and they happen to be reading the thing of Mordecai. Now, it could also be that they just went back in time, kind of from their back, because it wasn't that long ago that Mordecai had done that. But the king then asks the question: what honor or dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? So what's he really asking?
What did we do for him?
Because he saved my life,
yeah.
You know. So, and that's kind of a big deal, you know. It's kind of surprising that in the moment he didn't do anything about it, you know. But it could also be, it is possible that the king didn't actually realize that the king was informed about it, but that the chronicler who had the additional information is the one that wrote it down. So it could be that the king either didn't know about it in the moment, or else he didn't know about it at all until he read it in the chronicle.
Or
but
he
either
was
way,
busy.
well, that's what I'm saying, is he could just as easily have gotten busy and had other things to do. I mean, he's got to have another banquet, right?
There's more wine.
That's right. We've got the wine, let's have another banquet. You know, we'll worry about that whole Mordecai thing later. So he reads about this and he
But
says,
he shows it's honorable.
That's right.
I like that.
And I think this is an important thing. I get my impression of the king overall as I go through this is that he is a good guy who maybe doesn't have, he's not necessarily the smartest guy in the world, and doesn't always have, like, he kind of gets excited about things and then he kind of loses interest a little bit in them. I get that sense. And so you get, but he's not a moron, because he knows he doesn't always know everything. He asks people questions, he gets advice, he does those kind of things. So he's not the kind of king that we see with Nebuchadnezzar, or at least the first part of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, where Nebuchadnezzar is completely self-centered, completely arrogant, and doesn't really listen to anyone or pay attention to anybody else except himself. This guy is smart enough to know what he doesn't know and ask questions, and when he has time to stop and think, he usually makes good decisions. It's when he does things kind of impulsively that he sort of runs into issues. So the king, as you said, he's honorable because he realizes nothing's been done for this guy. That's not okay. So his first question is, who's in the court? Now, why does he ask that question? Besides the fact that God's probably just messing with Haman at this point. So,
well, he's not going to go do it himself. He's
okay.
going to delegate this task to somebody that either knows more about how to do it or has access to the things to do it based on the king's request.
Okay.
And he needs a court officer to do it.
Okay, so he needs somebody from the court to do it. And also, we'll notice in a second here that he asks Haman what should be done. And so in asking Haman what should be done, it suggests here again that what he's doing is he's thinking, I don't really know. And part of that maybe, it's kind of like, you know, when, I'm trying to remember who the politician was. It was one of the presidential candidates, somebody who was really wealthy, who didn't understand like how grocery stores work, like how to check out at the grocery stores. Like the concept of like the quick checkout where you can like scan and, you know, do it yourself. They were completely confused by that because they didn't live in that world. They had somebody go do that for them. And I think part of this, the reason the king is going to ask Haman is because it's kind of like, well, I know how I'd like to be honored, but the ways that I would like to be honored, I can't do that for somebody else because I'm the king and nobody else can do that. So I need like I need somebody who's got royal experience but hasn't been a king their whole life to figure out what would be the appropriate thing to do for somebody who isn't a royal person.
And I want ideas.
Right, exactly.
Let's be creative. Let's be imaginative. Haman, tell me how to do this.
Okay, so exactly. So where did I have you stop, Ian? Middle of verse 6, okay. So what is to be done for the man who the king desires to honor? So he asks him, yes, what do we do for this? All right, so somebody pick up for me in verse, the second part of that verse and go through verse 9.
Let Ian finish that.
Yeah, Ian, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, we'll just start at the beginning of verse 6 here. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" And Haman said to himself, "Whom would the king delight to honor more than me?" And Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and the horse that the king has ridden, on whose head a royal crown is set." You want 9?
Yeah, go ahead and read to the end of the paragraph, basically, so, yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. "And let the robes and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them dress the man whom the king delights to honor, and let them lead him on the horse through the squares of the city, proclaiming before him, 'Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.' Then the king said to
Okay,
him..."
wait, stop there.
Stop there.
Stop there. So, okay, so, I mean, this is fantastic, because of course, Haman believes immediately, oh, he must be talking about me. Now, this is a dangerous kind of thinking. I think we don't even need the Bible to tell us that it's dangerous to assume that everything is about you, you know?
Yeah.
That's a dangerous way to think. And so sure enough, though, Haman's immediate assumption is, well, the king must desire to honor me. So everything he says from that on is basically what Haman would like to have done for him in order to show off how powerful he is. Now, I think it's fascinating that he says, let a royal robe be brought that the king has worn, which, you know, it's like people who buy game-worn jerseys on like Amazon.com or something like that. It just seems creepy to me, but whatever. So, you know, but the point is it's associated with the king. It's so close to the thing that he actually wore it.
He wants
you know?
to play king dress
That's
up.
exactly it. And so he got the king's horse. Now, it's kind of interesting because English and Hebrew, there's a lot of differences between English and Hebrew. For one thing, Hebrew goes from right to left, and it also doesn't really have any spaces or periods or punctuation, or vowels, yeah. But one thing that's kind of interesting about Hebrew is that Hebrew has a way to denote if you have multiple subjects in a sentence, which of the subjects a following phrase is designed to refer to. Whereas in English, whatever the last phrase is the one you're assuming it applies to. So listen to this when it says. So he says, "Let them bring a royal robe which the king has worn, and the horse on which the king is ridden, and on whose head a royal crown has been placed." So strictly speaking, when you read that sentence, whose head is the crown being placed on?
In English, it's
The horse, right, in English, yeah. So in Hebrew, there's a way to designate, no, we're talking about the guy, but nevertheless, it kind of sounds like it's the horse with the crown, which I think is fantastic. So anyway,
I've seen them at the circus.
that's true. That's true. So as you said, this is Haman really basically wanting to play dress up like the king. You know, he's wanting to show off. My guess is that when it comes time to actually do all this for Mordecai is probably a little bit horrified with this whole thing. But you know, because none of this is the sort of thing that given what we know about kind of what we see about Mordecai's character, is the sort of thing that he would probably want to have done. But nevertheless, of course, it all has to happen because once the king decrees it, it has to go forward and everything. So he comes with this whole thing.
Ken.
Oh, Ken, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. The other thing about Mordecai, you said be horrified by this, he is still in
Right.
anguish and mourning over the fact that the
Right.
Jews are being set up to be destroyed.
Yeah.
Right.
And he does not want to be put on a public display in the midst of his grief, and
Right.
he's wearing sackcloth and ashes back there, we saw it.
That's a kind of a step. Now, with that said,
And he's never drawn attention to it.
I've got to, now, with all that said, and all that is true, I've got to think that when they show up, the servants show up to Mordecai's place, and they tell him all this, and they tell him it was Haman's idea, and that Haman is going to lead the horse. We'll get to that in a second here. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead, but I think most of you know the story. I got to think that on some level, Mordecai probably thinks to himself, you know what? I think this is all going to turn out okay. Because on some level, God does not do something that messed up without actually having a plan. You know, I just have to think that, like, you know, he sees all this going, and also you wonder, like, with a servant, like when he goes into the palace to get dressed up, and he sees Haman there, if he isn't having a hard time not cracking up and laughing, because the whole situation, it speaks to the providence of God so strongly that I've got to think that Mordecai starts to see how this is going to go at this point. You know, that the situation is definitely going in his favor. So, okay, so
I think we need to make a plaque that says that, you know what, I think everything's going to be okay.
all right, somebody read for me verses 10 through 11.
Then the king said to Haman, hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned. So Haman took the robes and the horse, and he dressed Mordecai and led him through the square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor.
So, what's that?
With gritted teeth.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I actually misspoke. It wasn't any servants that went in.
Yeah.
Actually, Haman himself got to do the whole thing, you know. So, yeah, but that's fine. That's what all I wanted. So I love that what he says. The king tells him to do that. He doesn't even bother to tell Haman why. So this is kind of interesting. Now maybe he did, and it's just not recounted here. But imagine that Haman has all these plans, everything that he's got set up in his mind, and instead the king just says this from nowhere. Guess what you're doing instead? You know, so he doesn't even necessarily know why he's doing this. Now maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. I'm not saying we know for sure, but imagine if he doesn't. Now he's got more problems than just the question of, you know, whether he had the fact that he had to do this humiliating thing. Now he's starting to wonder, wait a minute, does the king know that, you know, that I've got this whole plan? Am I being set up? And of course the answer is yes, but it's not the king that's setting you up, it's God, and that's worse. So, you know, okay.
The music should change.
That's right, that's right.
If you look at Haman's philosophy, I mean, as a narcissist, you know, he's very much me.
Yeah.
You know, what I want. So the whole thing, right from the beginning, because Mordecai wouldn't bow to him, it's affecting him personally.
Right.
And he's afraid, I think also, that if Mordecai won't bow to me, then what's going to keep everybody else from not bowing to me? So, I mean, his self-service, his narcissistic attitude is what it shows up all the way through here. You know, even his beginning thought that who else is going to be honored but me? You know, that's exactly the type of personality that a narcissist has.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that narcissism is visible all the way through this. And of course, the worst thing that a narcissist can have to do is to embarrass themselves and to have to acknowledge publicly that somebody else is better than them, or maybe not better than them, but have to go around and call attention to somebody else besides me. And that's the whole thing, the whole job that he's set up for himself because he was too focused on himself. And one of the things I think that you kind of see out of this, now obviously God is manipulating events here to a significant extent, but there's also a reality that narcissists rarely are happy. They rarely have moments of happiness that last very longer than just a very short period of time.
Right.
Because the truth is that the world is not about any one of us.
Right.
And so a narcissist who believes it is constantly being reminded of the fact that it's not. And is constantly seeking validation for believing that it is. And so narcissists do not spend a lot of their time happy.
No, they spend most of their time threatened.
Yes, that's exactly right. There's this kind of like develops into type of paranoia in a way, because since I'm supposed to be the center of attention, whenever I'm not, something is wrong. You know, you're pointing at Ken.
Yeah.
Is because he is a narcissist, or is he upset?
Well, he was raising his hand. I don't think he was volunteering that.
Ken, go ahead.
Jerry said something that ties back to a mindset we've already seen in this book, that Haman is concerned that Mordecai is just the beginning of a slippery slope of loss of any and everybody bowing down.
Right.
That was the argument the advisors used against Vashti, that this is going to spread through the whole kingdom if you don't nip it off right now.
Yeah.
So, somehow the king may be surrounded by these kinds of people.
Yeah, well, there's and you may have used this phrase already, there's a phrase in law called the slippery slope argument.
I just used it.
You did, I did, okay. So in law, the argument that's frequently used is, if you do this, then this could happen, and this could happen, and this could happen. Generally, that's not considered an acceptable argument by itself, but it is a very, very common argument, and it's also a very, very common argument, by the way, with religions.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if you do this,
I didn't know it
you know,
stemmed from the law.
Right.
I've heard it in churches a lot.
oh yeah, no.
growing up.
It isn't just a legal, it's actually what's called a logical fallacy.
Yeah, and they weren't talking about slip and slide either.
No, and so you see, but you see a lot of religions where, you know, we have to maintain our purity we have to maintain our whatever it is, our way of doing things. And we're talking about this right now in our sermons anyway, this whole Pharisaical mindset of the slippery slope. And a lot of what Phariseeism was about was setting boundaries that were way far back from the actual potential violation of the law to make sure you didn't get there. And to go over those boundaries was to get onto that slippery slope. That was their fear. And so there does seem to be a significant element of that. And I can see where you would, if you're king and you rule a massive empire, slippery slope arguments would have a particularly dear place in your heart, because the simple fact is you cannot really expect to rule an empire that big unless people are afraid, or at least they have a general feeling of we're not going to do something that would threaten the king's power.
Well, you made the empire by militarily overcoming and defeating all of these people, these different cultures, languages,
right?
And what, 127 provinces that you defeated militarily. So the sword is the only thing that keeps you the king.
Well, in the Persians were a little bit more advanced, because in many ways they took over the Babylonian Empire. They took over a lot of it politically, but they still had to conquer, and they still had to know that Babylon did it, and they were the next empire after Assyria, which had done it that way. So you rule by fear. And the issue is this. Well, there's kind of two issues. One is, today in our society, we have the idea of democratic buy-in, where as long as most people buy into the idea that they have representative democracy and that they're involved in the government, and the government is doing things that, even if they don't like them, that they've been chosen, they've been elected fairly, or they've been elected legitimately, or whatever, and that's one of the dangers of some of the thinking we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. But there's this general perception that if the system and the process is fair, then we can accept the fact that sometimes we don't get the outcomes that we want. And by and large, most people buy into that. Yeah. The danger is that if that starts to break down, you have a similar situation to this one. But here's the big difference between today and then. And the difference is that today, if there were to be an uprising against the government has tanks and F-15 Eagles and Apache helicopters, and the simple fact is that the citizens who think they can win because they've got an AR-15 are wrong. Now, in a limited way, that's possible, but when you get right down to it, the simple fact is that 1 or 2 units of the National Guard can put down almost anything that a large group of citizens could try to do, because the quantitative difference between the weaponry possessed by the government and its agents and by the citizenry and their friends and families is functionally different. Back then, it's pretty much swords and spears and shields and chariots, and a lot of people have those that aren't necessarily part of the government. And so in one respect, it is a much more fearsome thing to, if a whole lot of people were to start thinking, you know what, this isn't legitimate. There's the real risk of a significant uprising, which is one of the reasons we see those happening so often back in that period of time. And so a king in this period of time, especially one who oversees a huge empire, where he can't directly himself know the minds of most of his citizens, is definitely going to be nervous about the risk of losing control of things. And Haman is going to be a product of that same kind of a system, and so that kind of thinking is likely to infect him as well. Being a narcissist, that kind of thinking is going to infect him even if he didn't have that system. So he's kind of got a double whammy here going on. Okay, somebody read for me verses 12 to the end of the chapter.
Afterward, Mordecai went back to the king's gate, but Haman hastened to his house, mourning with his head covered. Then Haman told his wife, Zeresh, and all her friends everything that had happened to him. His wise men and his wife Zeresh said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet which Esther had prepared.
Okay, so I like first of all Mordecai's response. He's like, all right, I guess we're done. We'll go back to the gate. He doesn't go celebrate. He just come back to usual. Haman, of course, heads home in mourning because he's had to do this whole thing. Covers his head, which is the closest thing I guess he comes to sackcloth and ashes. And so then he gets back to his wife and his friends and tells them what's happened to him. And they say what to him?
Bummer,
He's a Jew,
dude.
you're dead.
Okay.
Run away.
Right. So here's what's interesting though. Okay, so he said, he tells them this, and they say, if he's a Jew, you're dead, or, basically. But notice if you go back to chapter 5, verse 11, when he's talking to those same people, after recounting all of the great stuff that's done to him, he says, yet all of this does not satisfy me every time I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. I'm thinking maybe they should have pointed out the potential problems with his plan the first time he told him Mordecai was a Jew rather than the second time. So what's changed? Why are they saying it now when they didn't say it then?
They're actually able to see what is shaping, what is falling together. But Mordecai,
Okay.
He can't see a forest. He sees bark and bugs.
Okay.
And frankly, this is a restatement of something that was said elsewhere in the Bible, which, wait, yours is the God of the Jews? Uh-oh,
Right.
we want no battle with you guys.
Right. So I think that
Rahab actually said that to this.
Rahab, that's right. And there's other places where we see that sentiment being expressed as well, in the Old Testament in particular. But I think what's interesting is it appears that it is exactly what you said, which is that as this is developing, the people that are Haman's friends and family can see the hand of the divine in what's taking place, and Haman's not seeing it.
No.
And so what their advice hasn't really changed in the sense of the fact that Haman is, or that Mordecai is a Jew. What has happened is that they've started to see that now it's apparent that God is with him, and bad things are happening to Haman, and it's not going to get any better. That's really what they're telling him is if you keep going this way, you've already started to fall. And if you keep going this way, you're just going to fall even further. So, because he is a Jew. So maybe when they first heard it, either they didn't believe it, or they didn't think it would necessarily come into play. But once they realize that it's coming into play, that this is a real thing, they're saying, you got to get out. You got to stop.
They're not poisoned by narcissism.
Right. They
narcissists
have to spend all their time building up the family narcissists, so they
well,
don't have
true
time.
enough, but also narcissists don't go in groups.
That's true. Yeah.
They surround themselves with sycophants,
Yeah.
and followers.
Yeah. And so they're able to see what's going on. Haman does not, and so that, in fairness, it's possible that he does at this point, and it's too late because the thing is, because they say this to him as soon as they say the people come and get him and take him out to the banquet, and you've got to think, on some level at least, does Haman? They came to usher him off to a banquet, and you think, okay, that's a good thing. It's like somebody coming and getting you to go to a party. But if Haman is processing what his friends and family have said to him, he may look at this more like the executioners have come to get me. And of course, that's going to turn out to be very true in a sense, but it may very well be that that's his thinking. We don't really know because we don't have Haman's thinking necessarily clarified for us right now. So it's very interesting, given all the things that have happened, and again, especially if Haman doesn't know whether the king, doesn't know the reason why the king honored Mordecai, he may be going to this banquet already thinking the whole situation is out of control and he's in trouble. Or he may not, we just don't know. So it's kind of, there's an interesting aspect to this that the axe is descending towards his head, and how much of it he realizes is kind of open for interpretation. Mike, you had a comment in that Jerry did.
The text points out that it was the eunuchs who came and collected it. What do you know about eunuchs? Well, they're surgically or genetically altered. Fine. They have no interest in women. Therefore, they are the guards, and they are big, beefy steers.
Right.
And who would send the eunuchs? Esther sent the eunuchs to collect Haman. He is now responding to her summons.
Yeah.
The eunuchs are there in the court of women, serving pretty much at their pleasure, protecting them.
Yeah, that's true.
And the eunuchs were from her, not from the king. So, come on, young man, it's time to go.
Right.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. All right, Jerry?
I guess I take it a different direction because of his narcissistic attitude. I don't think he has yet able to see it. I think he still believes he's in good favor. He's had some things that have not been in his favor, walking around town leading Mordecai, but a heavy-duty narcissist doesn't see a bigger picture. They still see themselves as being number one, and looking at, I'm still going to the dinner with the queen. I'm still going with the king. Everything will be okay. I'm still the good guy.
Wow.
That's just a different approach to Haman.
Unfortunately, you speak from experience. You've
Yes.
had a narcissist in your life.
So,
Yes.
so you're right in the sense that narcissists definitely think that everything is about them, but I have definitely known narcissists who also sometimes think that everything is a conspiracy against them as well.
Well,
So-
that's true.
So that's
Yeah.
my point, is I don't know which one is true or in this particular case, because the scriptures on a number of places go through and tell us what Haman is thinking, or how he's feeling. This is the one place we don't really see that from the beginning of 7 until the point at which he realizes first, we're definitely sure he knows the situation is bad. We don't get any insight into his specific feeling about the situation. So my point is simply that either one of those is a possibility. It could be that as a narcissist, he's thinking, it's all gonna be fixed. I'm still the center of attention. Or it could be that as a narcissist, he's thinking, they're all conspiring against me. And now he's starting to see everything as, a threat and a danger. It's hard to know for sure. But the point we'll see in a second, or next week is, it didn't matter how he's looking at it, it's definitely going bad on him. So, Mark?
I was going to say, so far, he hates Mordecai so much, but he hasn't connected Mordecai to Esther.
That's true.
Oh,
Yes.
right, that's
There's no way you
because-
could have.
Yeah.
That's the hidden piece.
He hates Mordecai so much, but the queen, she can't be a Jew.
Right.
Yeah, oh, good.
She's somebody else.
Yes,
So
that's true.
that's part of this whole story is that he hates this
Right.
guy so much, but he hasn't connected because
Right.
he couldn't.
See, that's what Chekhov's gun
Right.
in the story.
Is,
Because when Esther was put in the beauty pageant by Mordecai,
he
that
makes
was
it, keeps it
exactly what he
secret.
said.
Right.
Don't
Right.
tell them your nationality.
Exactly. There's this, it's built into the beginning of the story that nobody knows that even the king doesn't know that she's a Jew. Now, the king, we will see, doesn't care. Mordecai cares, Haman is going to care a lot, briefly. But anyway, we'll get to that next week. We'll get to that next week. For now, we need to go ahead and break because we're about 5 minutes over. So thank you guys for your participation.